Suzimichi memorably describes a typical approach to selecting an intervention for testing as employing the ISLIGAP method. That is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Despite specifying the problem and identifying a priority behavior to target, it's common for researchers and practitioners alike to select an intervention on the basis of familiarity or what's politically expedient or cheap, without considering how these characteristics may trade off against each other. The key problem then is to identify which interventions are feasible for testing. The process to address this is called a feasibility assessment. And by doing this process, you will identify which interventions are worth further investigation through a pilot or a trial. To get started with feasibility assessment, you need a single target behavior, a list of possible interventions that would change that behavior, and the team that's responsible for developing or testing the intervention. We suggest using one of two tools to assess intervention feasibility. The first, APPEASE, was designed by Robert West and Suzimichi and is part of the behavior change wheel. You can use APPEASE by rating each potential intervention on whether it is affordable, whether you can deliver it as intended to the target population, whether the intervention will be cost effective, whether your stakeholders, including both the audience whose behavior you're trying to change, but also the research commissioner and the organization who is responsible for delivering at scale, the likelihood of backfire effects or unintended consequences, and whether the intervention will fairly or unfairly burden some groups over others. An alternative tool for intervention feasibility testing is designed by the World Health Organization and ExpandNet for scaling up health system innovations, and it's called CORRECT. To use CORRECT, you rate each potential intervention on whether it is credible to the stakeholders, whether the intervention is visible, that is, can people see it working in practice, whether it has a relative advantage over what others are already doing to try and solve the problem, the ease by which it can be implemented, its compatibility with existing practices, which is highly relevant when you're scaling up, where you no longer have direct oversight over delivery of the intervention. And finally, whether the intervention can be tested before being rolled out more widely. Here's an example of a completed APPEASE tool. In this example, the researchers were trying to choose between different interventions that could change shoppers' behavior so that they wore a mask during their visit to a supermarket. The researchers considered each behavior on these criteria and were able to identify signage at the entrance to a supermarket as the most feasible intervention to test. So a tool like APPEASE or CORRECT can help you to identify which intervention or interventions are feasible for testing in a pilot or trial, and help you identify any assumptions relevant to later scale up.